Hi, everyone. Today, we are moving on to our next unit to talk about upper middle grade literature and child development. So, we're focusing on ages 10 or 11 up to 13, so that sort of tween age, the kids who would be in middle school. So, here's what we're going to be talking about today. First, we're going to examine developmental milestones in tweens, so those ages 11 to 13 years old, focusing, as with our other units, on cognitive, emotional, and social development. Then we're going to talk about the needs of upper middle grade readers, grades 6 to 8, and examine some features of the books written for children in this age range. This lecture can be paired with those on Joey Pigza, The Watsons Go to Birmingham, and Tangerine, which are the books we're examining for this unit, all written for upper middle grade or middle school readers. So, just as I mentioned before, and I'll say it again, the needs of readers fall on a continuum, just like their developmental milestones. So some people may be reading a little bit ahead. At this age in middle school, you'll find some kids who are already reading young adult and even new adult or adult books. You have some kids who are still reading lower middle grade novels. But we'll talk about just this section here today and how it meets the needs of kids who are in middle school. So how do children change from 11 to 13? These young people are really almost teenagers. So tweens is another word that's not my favorite word, but I do use it in this presentation. Tweens means that they're in between. They're in between childhood and adolescence. So a lot of times because of this, they go through some physical changes that might be confusing. They have internal conflict. They start to need independence, but they also yearn to be part of a peer group. They still rely sometimes on mom and dad for help. So they're beginning to search for identity. Pop culture and peer influences start to define who they are. And we're going to talk about this in the books for this unit, particularly how kids this age begin to interact with others and not just with their family unit, like we've seen in our previous in books for younger readers. So at 11, preteens might begin to have some complex social dynamics to kind of face and navigate. And as I said, they're still relying on their parents, and yet at the same time they want independence, but they're not quite ready for it. Also, when they're going through puberty, which takes place beginning around this time, they can be confused, they can be embarrassed, they can sometimes be prideful, depending on if they've hit some of those milestones early or on time. Cognitively, tweens have some problem-solving skills. So younger kids rely on parents a lot of times because they don't have problem-solving skills. They come upon a problem, they don't know how to solve it, they don't know what to do. They need an older person to help them, a parent or a teacher or a mentor. But it's common for 12 to 13-year-olds to think that they're immune from anything bad happening to them. They don't really think about the future that much. So they live by YOLO, you only live once. And they don't. So in some sense, they kind of are limited cognitively to seeing outside of their present circumstances, which is also true of younger kids. But here, they can kind of get stuck. They might also struggle to think about consequences of their behavior before they act. So they might kind of impulsively jump into things. And different parts of the brain develop at different rates. So, it's interesting. You have someone who wants independence and yet at the same time is acting emotionally and impulsively. So that can kind of spell trouble. 13-year-olds do, though. By the age of 13, a child has the ability to think abstractly. At least most children do. So concepts like faith, trust, loyalty, love, beyond just simple black and white terms. And they might also think, because of all these things going on, I'm unique. No one understands me. No one can really know what I'm going through right now. Again, a limit on seeing beyond one's circumstances. And almost, to me, a little backwards tracking in empathy. We talked about younger children just being able to see things from their point of view. Older children in this age range struggle with that as well, because they're very concerned with their changing lives and emotions. So how does literature reflect some of these changes and meet the needs of readers? In middle school, tweens are exposed to a wider range of fiction and nonfiction material in their lessons. So branching out a little bit, hopefully, from what they were reading before. They look to develop critical analysis skills. So looking at if an author is writing an argument, what that argument is, whether or not they agree with it, thinking creatively as well, reporting their own research and findings. So a person in middle school would be able to do a report and do research on their topic and then report back that information. When reading fiction, they typically, if they like reading, enjoy more complex stories on a variety of subjects. They a lot of times they don't want to read the same thing all the time. Now, you might get a teen or a tween who really likes who really likes romance books, or who really likes mysteries, or who really likes fantasy. But a lot of times, because they're forming their identity, they're trying to figure out what they like and what they don't like. So they'll be a little bit more experimental in what they read at this age. Rather than the episodic tales that we talked about last time, a middle school student should be able to read a longer novel with a plot, subplots, a larger cast of characters. Flashbacks, flash forwards, they can understand these things more than their younger counterparts. So the books that we are reading for this unit, 2 of them are a longer tale. One of them is sort of episodic in some ways, not to the extent of the lower middle grade books, though, and the subject matter changes in that book too. So I will talk about that when we get there. Middle school students also enjoy a series where books are interlocked. So having a story that takes place not just in one book, but over the course of a series, watching those characters grow and develop really helps them think about the future. So, I read this book about a person who started off in 6th grade. Now they're in 9th grade. What will my life be like when I'm that old? That kind of thing. Violence might still be off page, but it's treated more realistically than some of the cartoon violence of lower middle grade books. So we might see some violent incidences, but what I mean by off page is that it's not, how do I put this? It's not going to be a lot of blood and guts and gore, right? So if you think about a movie that's maybe PG-13 as opposed to an R rating. So a gun goes off, we hear a person fall, right? As opposed to an R-rated movie where a gun goes off, we see a person get shot, we see the blood, all of that. Or a PG movie where we hear about a person who was shot. That's really what I mean by off page. It's happening, but it's not happening in front of the narrator or in front of the audience. So here's an example of this. I'm going to pick up right here. This is a book called Escape from Aleppo. So it's a girl who is a middle schooler in wartime. This one had detonated nearly a mile away. Nadia had calculated, likely reducing its target to rubble. Her mouth ran dry as the memory of a similar bomb rose within her, one that left a deep scar from her knee to her hip. I can't go out there, she thought. She crawled back toward the security under her bed. Oh, no, you don't, growled Razan, grabbing her leg. This is not the time for you to play ostrich. But, cried Nadia, heart racing, panic building in her chest. Razan grabbed her face and held it close to hers. I know you're scared, but you have to focus, she said fiercely. We've practiced this, and all you need to do is exit the front door. I'll drag you the rest of the way. So a few things here. We have the focus. The bombing is going on, but the focus here is Nadia being scared and then relying on her older sister and kind of having this like weird thing right here. About don't play ostrich and grabbing her out of the bed, which is almost like a typical sibling fight, right? Between a younger sister and an older sister. We also see that she has a deep scar from her knee to her hip, and it has happened to her, but that part of the violence is not on page. So it's not being depicted directly where we see her leg being ripped open. We see the blood coming out. We see her getting stitched up and then having the scar. Emotional development. 13-year-olds have a lot of hormonal shifts that contribute to mood swings. So stress from school, things with peers, the drama of their daily life. Their moods are very often shifting because of these hormonal changes. A young teen also wants to have a say over their space, their body, meaning that they might put a sign on their door that says keep out, no trespassing, even though their parents own the house. They might slam a door and lock it to have some time alone, to have a little snit fit, or to genuinely just kind of take a break from the world. At this age, again, you know, the feeling of the world revolving around them, the return almost to self-centeredness, the lack of some empathy, can happen. Now, that's not to say that it happens to every single teen. It's not like every single teen is self-centered and annoying and, dealing with moodiness, but it can happen to many of them. And developmentally, it's pretty appropriate. They're shifting from being a child to being a teenager, and during that time, life can be kind of confusing. Most 13-year-olds also, 12 to 13 in this tween age range, experience fluctuations in self-esteem. So they're saying maybe, oh, I'm great at math and I'm awesome when they're 10, and by the time they're 12 or 13, they're like, I don't know anything about math and I'm stupid and I should just give up. Same kid just a couple years later. They also seek affirmation from adults. So they want to do things on their own, but they want adults to like them at the same time. So books for this age can really help tweens note that they're not alone. They want to read about characters that are going through some of the same changes that they're going through, to know that what they're feeling is normal. Characters in books for this age, what we're really going to see, to me, this is the biggest shift in literature for upper middle grade as opposed to lower middle grade. In lower middle grade books, they're very plot driven. And their focus is not character development. A lot of the characters are quite flat. By the time we get into upper middle grade, because these characters reflect a developing young teen or a tween, they are really complex and multifaceted. So our stories are going to be much more character driven than plot driven. And I want you to notice that in all three of the books that we're reading. It's not to say that there's not a plot, but the central character is telling their story in all three of these books. It's first person narration, and we get to see them grow and mature emotionally throughout the course of the story. Novels might also feature multiple points of view to help preteens think about an issue from more than just their self-centered standpoint. This can change greatly with books for younger readers. This can change As I said, books for younger readers often feature archetypes or flat characterization. Here, I talked about violence being off page. Sex is not going to be featured in these books, but I have here this book by Lauren Miracle. She's the author of 11 and 12, and then this is the third book, 13. The characters in her books, in 11, there's no romance at all. They're just sort of friends. In 12, they start just kind of looking at each other a little bit differently. And then here by 13, you have, like a first building up to a first kiss. I'll put it that way. And you can see the two people sitting on the bench. Now, I want to say this very clearly. Kids like reading this. Teachers do not. And oftentimes, a book like this by Lauren Miracle will not be used in a classroom setting because a teacher really doesn't want to talk about romance with the kids and, deal with watching them try to awkwardly flirt with their crush across the room. So some teachers, 6th and 7th grade particularly, might still try to avoid that. Now, that's not to say that those books won't be in a library or in a school library, but just that they probably won't be used in a classroom. At least that's been my experience anyway. Social development. So by this age, they have the ability to see other people's point of view. That doesn't mean, again, that they always can, especially when their emotions kind of crowd that out. So if you can get a teen or a preteen to see past their own emotions and their reaction to an event and see other people's point of view, that can be quite helpful. Really strong friendships, though, begin to develop. And complex, where they like somebody one day and they don't the other day, but it's difficult. Maybe this guy made fun of this guy, but now he's trying to be nicer, and this guy's trying to be friends with both of them. Those kind of situations can be difficult for preteens to navigate. They might go to a friend for advice rather than a parent. And we're going to see that at least in one of the books that we're going to be reading in this unit. They begin to confide in their peers more. They want to spend more time with them. So they're not quite at the age where they're driving yet, but they might be dropped off by a parent at a sporting event, or a school play, or I want to say the mall, but I don't know that people really do that. Friend's house, I guess, to just kind of hang out with their friends as opposed to just staying at home. Rebellious behavior is sometimes common. They also will begin to explore their identity. So playing around with hairstyles and different types of clothing, new hobbies, different friend groups, trying to find out kind of who they are apart from their mom and dad and who they want to become later in life. As we get into 13, 14, 15, we're going to see next time that sort of is the next step. So preteens show a concern about being liked and accepted by both their peers and the adult in their lives, and they're more interested in mixed gender activities. So younger kids a lot of times will, just the girls will play a game while the boys play another game. By 11, 12, 13, you're really going to see a lot of times girls and boys playing together awkwardly maybe, and not quite sure by 13 how to interact with each other, but that's going to be happening more and more. The Babysitter's Club. Boy Crazy Stacy. I picked that just because I think the cover is so funny. Her friends sort of are perplexed by this, right? So some people are not quite ready for that, and some people are. Sometimes parents are in the stories for this age range, but they're much less prominent than in books for younger kids. Complex friendships and strong bonds. We talked last time about how we start to see this in lower middle grade. Stronger bonds and friendships based on interest rather than convenience. Complex and difficult friendships are sometimes what we see. Plot lines feature unique struggles of being a tween. Not quite a teenager, not quite a child. And what I notice in books for this age range is many times the protagonist will have a younger brother or sister and sometimes an older brother or sister to kind of show how they're in the middle and how they're trying to make their way, not being a teenager but not being a kid. So it's kind of interesting. We can also see a lot of books where a character explores a new hobby, maybe rebelling from parents a little bit, especially if they're in a dysfunctional environment. Characters might struggle to find friends. So this idea of loneliness versus intimacy and a stage in life that comes later. But here, if a character is not on track developmentally, they might not have as many friends, or they might have trouble developing and maintaining friendships. So dealing with issues of loneliness, bullying, failing to be accepted, this can really speak to kids this age. And again, help them to know that they are not alone and they are not the only ones going through this. Books can be quite helpful and therapeutic in this way. Point of view is a lot more important than in previous years. So the books that we looked at for lower middle grade, they were written in third person point of view, kind of by design. It's not that all books for lower middle grade are third person, but I wanted you to really see the developmental changes. So for this unit, I picked 3 books that are told from first person perspective. So you really hear the voice of a preteen and hopefully understand some of the difficulties and the struggles of what they're going through. So communicating the complex emotions, their social standing, sometimes their physical development as well as their cognitive development. So intimate first person accounts, meaning that the first person is telling you everything that they're thinking, everything that they're feeling. Much different than for kids books for younger kids. Sorry. So here's an example of an upper middle grade book. This is called Drama. I think I mentioned this book before. So this girl has a crush on this guy, and this guy also has a crush on this guy, and might also like this girl, if I'm recalling it correctly. So this guy here is complaining about a girl that he liked, and he said, "It's not like she ever came to any of my baseball games. I don't know. I thought she was happy. I never." And then she leans over and kisses him. "What was that for?" "Oh, I don't know. Just something I've been wanting to do for a while." "But you're cool, Callie, but what? All you've ever said about Bonnie is that she's annoying and stuck up and only cares about herself." So you can kind of see from this interaction, right? First, that we have a different color hair, experimenting with who we are, or maybe just thinking that it's a pretty color, or maybe a little bit of both. She's bored of hearing her friend talk about this girl that he likes, so she impulsively makes the decision to kiss him. And then you can tell from her face, she's like kind of awkward, embarrassed, all of that. So that's what I mean by complex social situations. The younger kid is not going to be involved in that. Now, having said that, the illustrations in this graphic novel look like cartoons or like a comic strip, right? Especially with the coloring. And a lot of parents think that this really isn't for this age range. Sometimes it's placed in lower middle grade because of the illustrations. Sometimes it's placed in YA because of some of the subject matter. And again, parents and teachers don't really want to have books about people dating. The gender thing doesn't, and the sexuality doesn't seem to be as big of an issue when people complain about this book, as much as just the fact that there are kids who are dating and they're in 6th grade. That seems to be more of what parents are concerned about, that they don't want to have to talk to their kids about navigating those things, which is interesting, because kids want to talk about it and they need books to kind of help them navigate it. And I think a book like this can really be a good tool for a parent to spark conversation as opposed to running away from it. I will say, on the other hand, I don't completely disagree with parents who might not want their kids reading this, if they feel like especially their kids are maybe a little too young or immature to kind of handle those themes. So could go either way. So overall, readers ages 11 to 13. Some might be still reading lower middle grade books, so things more likely for, a fourth or a fifth grader to read. Others might be up into young adult novels. Reluctant readers might be drawn to illustrated books, such as graphic novels. This Graveyard Book by Neil Gaiman is a wonderful book and has some illustrations. Advanced readers might stretch themselves and read books for older teens. They might feel quite sophisticated and grown up by doing so they kind of enjoy that. They enjoy reading up, I think, a lot more even than little kids do. So a lot of times they love books that are longer, especially if they're part of a series. So if you think about Harry Potter starts when he's 11, right, and goes up to when he's, I think, 18 by the 7th book. So reading that, where we see him grow and change and we follow a longer, more complex plot line, cognitively is a great challenge. They typically read alone by this point. So lower middle grade, 8 to 10, like we talked about last time, they'll still read with an adult, but by this age, they're really not doing that. You might have some families where reading aloud is a tradition, and a whole family kind of gathers together, but the need for privacy and independence at this age usually kind of precludes that from happening. They might use books to explore their new identity. So looking at a book, for example, of a girl who is struggling with self-esteem, or looking at a book about a boy who takes up a new sport like soccer. And again, reading up. So looking for books with characters their age or older who they can relate to on an emotional level. As opposed to younger children, just really they want a fun, exciting book with adventure and humor. Humor for this age isn't going to be as big of a draw in terms of reading. Angst is. So that's something to kind of consider. It is still a draw. It's just not like the primary thing that kids are looking for a lot of the time. However, they might be more interested in reading to learn about new experiences, new cultures, a lot more diverse books for these ages, which is great. And here are some examples. Madeline Engel's Wrinkle in Time features a protagonist who's a tiny bit older, but the book really is appropriate for kids grades 6 to 8. I think the protagonist might be in 9th or 10th grade, but typically it's read in middle school. Nonfiction titles like this one, a lot more interest by this age in nonfiction. That's not the focus of our class, but now that preteens kind of know what they like and know what they're interested in, you might get somebody who likes doing costumes for cosplay, and so that's what they read about. And you might have somebody else who is super into marine biology, and so that's what they read about. Somebody else whose parents are trying to encourage them to be a strong, fearless, feminine leader. Holes is a great book. We didn't have time for that this semester. I almost picked it for you guys. About kids. I think he's 12 in the book, 12, maybe 13. Fantasy books like Percy Jackson can also be really exciting for kids, but also, again, unlike something like Narnia books, which I talked about last time, the characters are a lot more developed. So that is it for today, and I look forward to seeing what you guys have to say about our books for this unit. Again, if you have any questions, feel free to email me or leave them in the comments. Thanks, guys. Have a great day.